welcome back to another adventure in Australian literature. And today we are going to do one of the most important books and one of the most important writers in Australian literature, Miles Franklin. But before we do that, I have to tell you about our shop. So remember, we don't have Patreon, we don't have sponsors, we don't have advertising, we have a shop. If that's how you want to, if you want to support us, that's how you support us. So we have templates like these. They have free postage. We have t-shirts, and we have books. We have books to help you write the great Australian novel. We have science fiction comedy. We have books about the Great Australian Outback. We have books of funny verse. And we have historical novels. So, if any of those interest you, links are down below. You get 10% off the recommended retail price on the books in our shop. So, we're doing Miles Franklin. Okay, so if you don't know, if you're outside of Australia, this is the book. She wrote other things, but really everyone remembers her for this book, My Brilliant Career. Jane Campion made a film of it in the 1970s. It had Sam Neill and Judy Davis. Really famous film. Film is possibly more famous than the book, but the book, because the film was part of the great revival of Australian cinema, along with things like Gallipoli and Mad Max and Picnic at Hanging Rock. We will do the book Picnic at Hanging Rock at some point. I've watched the film, I haven't read the book yet, but we will do that. So people know My Brilliant Career from that. People also know the name Miles Franklin, because Miles Franklin, when she died, I think it was, left money in her will for an Australian literary prize, the Miles Franklin. Miles Franklin is one of the richest prizes in Australia for fiction. It is also the premier literary prize. Basically, it's like the Booker in England or the Pulitzer Prize in America. It is big. Also, a few years ago, maybe about 10 years, I'm not sure, no more than 10 years ago, because of the fact that the Miles Franklin, in spite of being named for Miles Franklin, Stella Miles Franklin, that in spite of that, the Miles Franklin had been predominantly written by male writers. So this group got together and started the Stella. And the Stella is only open to women writers. So she has 2 major literary awards named for her. My Brilliant Career. My Brilliant Career was written when Miles Franklin was a teenager. It was rejected by all the Australian publishers and was published in Britain initially with the help of none other than Henry Lawson. Henry Lawson recommended it based upon his assessment that the bush was written so beautifully. And the bush is, at this period, which is Federation, really part of the Australian nationalism that is coming up with Federation. The Australian concept of nationalism is based around the bush. It's based, so bush economy, the toughness of the bush, the resilience of the bush, men, very much related around men, men's world, and so that is where Australia is forging its identity. It is very male and it is very rural. In steps Miles Franklin, who, while rural, is an exceptionally female voice. She is a loud, and very female voice. Now, she doesn't fit the nationalism that is developing in Australia at this time, because where women are expected to be, you know, the quiet drover's wife of Henry Lawson, the woman who keeps the home running while the men are away. Yes, she's tough. Yes, she's strong, but she's still married and domesticated. And it's that marriage and domestication that Sybilla Melville, the character in this, and actually Miles Franklin, rebel against. So, My Brilliant Career is the story of Sybilla Melville. Sybilla Melville's father has a farm in, I think it's Brindabella, which is somewhere down near Canberra, that sort of area. And he trades his farm in for a dairy farm further out in a more drought-prone area of Australia. This is the 1890s. There is a severe drought. There is also an economic recession, big one. Both of these have impacts on the financial world that Sybilla lives in. They also had big impacts on the financial world of a great many Australians, as you can imagine. She doesn't reference these things explicitly. She does reference drought, but she doesn't. It's generally seen as, and there's negative things happening in their world. They are not as wealthy as they used to be because of her father's poor financial decisions. And so in order to make the financial situation in the household more bearable, and because Sybilla has made herself well and truly unhappy, and when Sybilla's unhappy, everyone's unhappy, she's shipped off to her grandmother's house, who is in, and not in, where she isn't in drought, and it's a much happier place for her to be. She's not stuck on this dairy farm going mad, because Sybilla Melville is an Australian girl. She is the first in a long tradition of Australian girls that will go through the 20th century. Now, I think we talked about these Australian women when I talked about Lillian's Story by Kate Grenville, and I'm not sure if I did then, but I have described them as Banksia girls. They might be attractive, but they're also incredibly prickly, and their beauty is not of the blown rose quality of English. It's not easily appreciated beauty. As a Banksia serrata is beautiful, but not in an easily appreciated way of a rose. It requires a bit more effort and a bit more understanding to understand it within its context. It's also really prickly, okay? Yeah. Don't necessarily want to approach those with your bare hands. Nor do you want to approach these girls, the Banksia girls, of which she's the first. Before I did this, one of the things that I do when I do a video is I Google the topic to see what else is on there. While there is a lot of stuff about the film My Brilliant Career, I only found one other YouTube video on My Brilliant Career, which is not uncommon. Often I'm doing the only video on a lot of these Australian books, which is part of the reason why I do Australian books, because it's a bit wide open. There aren't many people reading Australian books, and there aren't that many Australian YouTubers. But it struck me that he completely misunderstood the book. I'm not going to link it. I'm not going to give him the publicity. I don't want to open him up for mockery, because he did not understand the book. Oh yeah, I'm a bitch, aren't I? Australian girl. Sybilla Melville is prickly. I think it's not a coincidence that it was a male writer, and male reviewer, because the complaints that he had were essentially, she's not nice. they could all be reduced to smile being shouted at someone across the street. She's not nice. She's not this. She's not, placid and meek and lovely. No, she's not. She's Sybilla Melville. This is my brilliant career. This is dark, this is witty, this is sardonic, and this is acerbic. You do not get... This book is Australia's version of Jane Eyre or Little Women. Yeah. Jane Eyre never hit Rochester with a horsewhip. Did she? Probably would have been a more interesting book if she did. You probably would have locked her in the attic like Mrs. Rochester. She does. Actually, he doesn't really deserve it, but she does hit him with a horsewhip. Her love interest. This is not a story that is going to follow that nice arc of, and then they got married. And she was, she's a rough diamond, she's a tough, ambitious girl, but she meets the right man and she falls in love. And, even Jo March falls in love and marries. I know that Louise May Alcott didn't want to do that and was pressured to do that by her publishers. Hello. But even so, her Jo March, for all her unconventionality, is nowhere near coming up to what Sybilla Melville is like. In fact, when I was writing this, I was reading this, and that helped me write the main female character in this, Dottie, because I wanted that. I actually referenced this book in relation to Dottie in that book, because I wanted that toughness, I wanted that fierceness, that ferocity. Sybilla is also well aware that her horizons are curtailed. She doesn't have options. She has one option, really. The words, the title, My Brilliant Career, are deeply, deeply ironic. Australians know how to do irony. Okay. There is no career. She is a woman in the late 19th, early 20th century. There is no career. Okay? For most women, there is no vote. For most women, there is get married and an endless cycle of childbirth and child rearing and hoping, fingers crossed, hoping that your husband is not a desperate drunk, a gambler, or a complete speculator who is going to derail your life on a whim, as her father does. You are entirely dependent on men around you to do the right thing because you have no option. Now, if you are an intelligent and perceptive person who can see this and cannot see a way out because there are no ways out, I mean, she's given the option of marry or be a governess. Or not even really a governess, sort of for some horrible neighbour children. Not a governess in a fancy house like Jane Eyre, no, just like, oh wow, you're the glorified babysitter for some horrible, nasty neighbour kids. Hardly a brilliant career. And she means this ironically. But she doesn't end up picking the man. There is where this differs so dramatically from Jane Eyre and Little Women. She doesn't pick the man. She doesn't take the easy option. She could pick the man. She could go and live in a non-drought area and hope that he's decent. He has money at the moment, but you know, how long's that going to last? Her anger and frustration and her undirected ambition is deliberate. This was what was being complained about, that she has no direction and she has ambition but no direction, and he read that as entitlement. It's not entitlement, it is the extreme frustration of being an intelligent and capable human being and being prevented from fully exploring that because of the body you were born into. Now, there are many, many people who can understand and sympathise with that. There are so many people around the world today, all time, who have been limited because of the body that they were born into. That is why Sybilla is so angry. Sybilla's anger, Sybilla's spirit, Sybilla's frustration and her ambition, that's why I jokingly say that the reason why Australian women got access to universities before anyone else in the English-speaking world, and possibly a great many other places, why Australian women were, if you go by South Australia, thank you South Australia, because that beats the New Zealanders, yes. We always have to beat the New Zealanders. You've got to allow me a little bit of nationalism here. We beat the New Zealanders. The colony of South Australia gave women the votes first, so Australian women had the votes before anyone else in the world, and because no state could lose their rights, Australian women nationally got the vote in 1901. Sadly, the Federation stripped the Indigenous women of their votes that they had won in South Australia, which is very unfortunate. But it also allowed for women to stand for Parliament. In 1901, women were able to stand for Parliament, and the first woman to win a seat in Parliament was the Western Australian Edith Cowan. Edith Cowan has a university named after her in Western Australia. Okay? This is an incredibly feminist novel. It gives you an idea of the drive, the passion, the spirit, and the anger that gave women rights that they did not share with any of their sisters across the world. None had rights like we had in this country. Okay, we had rights that proved that the English were so terrified. We didn't have to stand in front of the King's Horse. We didn't have to get killed or blow things up or any of that sort of stuff. No, we're Australian women. We just got it because we'll hit you with a stick if you don't give it to us, or a horsewhip. In fact, because women in Australia had the vote so early, women suffragists and Edmund Barton, first Prime Minister Edmund Barton, went to England to help the suffragists in England with their cause and to prove, look, the sky didn't fall. We gave women the vote in Federation, and the whole thing didn't fall into a heap. Okay, so that's why this is important. This is important because it is a rare female voice in a time when most of the voices were male. It is a rare female voice in a time when nationalism was being defined, what is Australian was being defined by the men. And we see, here are the women. They are prickly, they are not pretty, though they probably are pretty. I would say that her assertions that she's not pretty are more the awkwardness of a teenager. Because when you look at the photographs of Miles Franklin, And this is a fairly autobiographical in that way. It's very, very easy to see that Sybilla is a self-insert. You know, normally self-inserts irk me, but it's Miles Franklin. You going to complain about Miles Franklin? No, of course not. Patrick White puts his lover in all his books. There's always a Greek in a Patrick White. Always. No one complains about him putting his lover in a book. Nope. There's always a Greek in a Patrick White. So, you know, I'm not going to complain that she's self-inserted into this. It is an absolute classic. And this is the beginnings of a definition of what is Australian identity for women. So if Henry Lawson gives us the men, Miles Franklin gives us the women. And they are spectacular. So, I will see you again sometime later with another adventure in Australian literature, and maybe then my hat will stop being so strange today. Then. Anyway, have fun. I'll see you again later. Bye-bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.